Have you ever felt that someone's silence was saying more than their words ever could? That strange distance, those mixed signals, the way they disappear only to return again. It can leave you searching for answers long after everyone else has moved on. The truth is, not every message is spoken out loud. Sometimes people reveal what they feel through the way they behave, even when they never admit it. Welcome to Dark Psyche. There are times when someone's actions tell a far more honest story than anything they could say. They hesitate, they pull away, they come back, they grow distant, then unexpectedly warm again. They avoid certain conversations but somehow keep finding reasons to stay connected. These contradictions are rarely random. They often point toward an emotional struggle taking place beneath the surface. Carl Jung believed that much of human behavior is driven by forces outside our conscious awareness. People often think they understand themselves completely, but the unconscious has a way of revealing hidden truths through repeated patterns. What someone cannot express openly may quietly appear in the choices they keep making. If you've been wondering why someone acts detached one day and emotionally invested the next, consider this possibility. Their conflict may not be about you at all. It may be happening inside them. They may genuinely care, yet feel terrified of what those feelings require. They may want closeness, while fearing vulnerability at the exact same time. When emotions become too overwhelming to face directly, they rarely disappear. Instead, they surface in indirect ways. A person may convince themselves they have moved on, yet still think about you when everything gets quiet. They may insist they are unaffected, yet continue checking your social media, asking mutual friends about you, or finding excuses to reconnect. Their words may sound final, but their behavior keeps writing another story. One of the most fascinating truths in psychology is that people often defend themselves most strongly against the emotions that affect them the most. If something truly meant nothing, there would be little need to constantly explain it, deny it, or run from it. Strong resistance usually points towards something emotionally significant. That doesn't automatically mean every distant person secretly wants a relationship. But when someone's actions repeatedly contradict their claims, it often suggests an unresolved emotional conflict they haven't fully understood themselves. Imagine carrying two opposite desires at the same time. One part of you longs for connection, safety, and understanding. Another part fears rejection, loss of control, or being emotionally exposed. Those two sides constantly pull against each other, making every decision feel like an internal battle. This is why someone can move closer one moment and create distance the next. They might start meaningful conversations only to disappear afterward. They may express genuine curiosity, then avoid emotional honesty when things become too real. To the other person, it feels confusing. To them, it feels like survival. Fear often disguises itself as indifference. Pride can sound like certainty. Emotional wounds can look like emotional distance. Many people appear calm on the outside while carrying enormous emotional tension beneath the surface. Jung taught that whatever remains unacknowledged doesn't simply fade away. Hidden fears, unresolved pain, and unmet emotional needs continue influencing behavior until they are finally confronted. That's why some people keep repeating the same relationship patterns. They return to familiar emotions, familiar people, and familiar unfinished stories, because the lesson beneath those experiences has never truly been learned. When someone hasn't developed the language to understand their own emotions, inconsistency often becomes their language instead. They send mixed signals, hesitate when commitment feels possible, and retreat whenever vulnerability begins to feel real. Not because they enjoy creating confusion, but because they are struggling to make sense of what is happening inside themselves. The important thing to remember is this: another person's emotional conflict is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it reflects the fears they haven't healed, the beliefs they haven't questioned, and the truths they are still trying to avoid. Until they are willing to face those inner conflicts honestly, their actions may continue to send messages they are not yet ready to speak aloud. Sometimes people don't return because they're chasing another chance with someone else. They return because a part of themselves was never able to move on. The connection becomes tied to an unanswered question, an emotional wound that never fully healed. What keeps pulling them back isn't always the person alone. It's the truth about themselves that they have spent so much energy trying to avoid. If they could put that struggle into words, it might sound like this. What I feel is real, but I don't know what to do with it. That kind of honesty is difficult for someone who has learned to protect themselves from emotional exposure. Instead of speaking openly, they hide behind distance, hesitation, and mixed signals. This is why fear often disguises itself as emotional detachment. Confidence can become a mask for insecurity. Silence can hide an endless conversation taking place inside the mind. What appears to be indifference may actually be someone trying desperately to regain control over emotions that feel stronger than they expected. Anyone who has loved an emotionally guarded person understands how confusing this can be. Their behavior rarely matches what their heart is experiencing. They don't necessarily create distance because they lack feelings. Sometimes they create distance because those feelings force them to face parts of themselves they have avoided for years. Carl Jung believed that other people often become mirrors. They don't simply reflect who we are. They reveal the parts of ourselves we haven't accepted. A meaningful relationship can awaken forgotten hopes, old disappointments, hidden fears, and a longing for closeness that has been buried beneath years of emotional self-protection. When someone encounters that reflection, they may instinctively step away. Not because the connection is meaningless, but because it feels too revealing. Looking into that mirror requires honesty, and honesty demands courage. So when someone suddenly becomes distant, don't assume their emotions have disappeared. In many cases, emotional intensity creates more avoidance, not less. The deeper the connection feels, the greater the challenge for someone who has never learned how to feel safe with vulnerability. Some people leave because they no longer care. Others leave because they are overwhelmed by feelings they cannot organize or explain. Their inner conflict becomes visible through inconsistent actions. One day they seek closeness. The next day they withdraw. They create hope, then uncertainty. They make promises through their actions before taking them back through silence. The confusion they create often reflects the confusion they live with every day. They question whether they can love without losing themselves. They wonder if opening their heart will lead to acceptance or disappointment. Until those questions are answered within, every relationship becomes a battle between desire and self-protection. Without realizing it, they communicate this struggle through repeated patterns instead of direct conversations. They long for connection but fear dependence. They want honesty but hesitate to reveal their own emotions. They hope to be understood while hiding the very feelings that need understanding. That is why absence can become unexpectedly powerful. When distractions disappear and life grows quiet, the unconscious begins to speak. Familiar memories surface without warning. A conversation, a shared laugh, a meaningful glance, or a moment they thought they had forgotten suddenly returns with surprising clarity. The unconscious rarely demands attention all at once. It arrives gently, through recurring thoughts, vivid dreams, unexpected emotions, or an urge to know how someone is doing after weeks or even months of silence. Pride may insist everything is over, but the deeper mind continues searching for whatever remains unfinished. At its core, the real struggle is often not whether love existed. The greater struggle is whether someone is prepared for everything genuine love requires. Real intimacy asks people to be honest, accountable, emotionally present, and willing to lower the defenses that once kept them safe. For someone carrying unresolved fears, that can feel more threatening than the loss of the relationship itself. So they choose emotional distance, believing it will protect them. Yet distance rarely resolves what lives within. Until they confront the fears beneath their behavior, those same emotional patterns continue to follow them, quietly asking for the courage they have not yet found. Some people would rather leave a relationship undefined than risk exposing the parts of themselves that still feel broken. They linger at the edge of connection, stepping closer when they miss it, and stepping away when it begins to feel too real. From the outside, their behavior seems impossible to understand. Inside, they are wrestling with emotions they don't yet know how to carry. If they could express that struggle honestly, it might sound like this. These feelings are bigger than I expected, and I don't know how to handle them. Many people imagine love as something obvious and fearless. They expect it to be clear, confident, and consistent. But human emotions rarely unfold so neatly. Love can exist alongside fear. Affection can live beside self-protection. A person can deeply value someone while still lacking the emotional tools to build a healthy connection. That is why genuine feelings do not always appear as perfect communication. Sometimes they appear as uncertainty, hesitation, or repeated attempts to reconnect that never quite become lasting change. The heart may know what it longs for long before the mind feels safe enough to admit it. When someone continues thinking about you, remembers small details, finds subtle reasons to stay connected, or keeps revisiting the relationship in their own thoughts, it doesn't automatically mean they are ready to come back. It simply suggests the experience still holds emotional weight. Some connections continue shaping people long after the conversation has ended. Don't confuse emotional silence with emotional absence. A quiet person may still be carrying loud emotions. Someone who appears composed may be fighting an internal battle no one else can see. Distance can sometimes hide vulnerability just as easily as it hides indifference. There are people who spend years believing that staying guarded is the safest way to live. They convince themselves that control will protect them from disappointment. Then one meaningful relationship challenges that belief. Suddenly they care more than they planned to. They become more emotionally invested than feels comfortable. The defenses that once seemed permanent begin to weaken. That experience can feel deeply unsettling. Old fears return. Past disappointments become louder. The desire for closeness competes with the instinct to retreat. Their actions become inconsistent, not necessarily because they wish to mislead anyone, but because they haven't learned how to balance connection with emotional safety. Sometimes what looks like mixed signals is actually someone struggling with unresolved wounds. They want intimacy, but they fear dependence. They want honesty, but vulnerability feels risky. They want love. Yet old experiences keep warning them that love eventually leads to pain. Carl Jung believed that meaningful relationships often become opportunities for inner growth. The people who affect us most don't simply enter our lives. They expose the parts of ourselves that still need attention. They reveal hidden fears, forgotten hopes, unresolved grief, and strengths we never realized we possessed. In that sense, an important relationship becomes more than a romance. It becomes a mirror. It shows us where we feel secure and where we still seek protection. It challenges the stories we have been telling ourselves for years. When someone struggles to explain what they feel, it may be because two opposing forces are competing inside them. One side longs for closeness, honesty, and emotional peace. The other clings to familiar defenses that once felt necessary for survival. Until those parts are reconciled, inconsistency often becomes the result. Time alone cannot resolve that conflict. Growth requires self-awareness, accountability, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Without that inner work, people often repeat the same emotional patterns with different partners, hoping for a different outcome. If you continue noticing signs that someone still carries the connection in their heart, remember that those signs speak about their internal journey, not your responsibility. Their unresolved emotions are theirs to understand and address. The healthiest response is not to chase certainty from someone who cannot yet offer it. Protect your own peace. Let your self-respect remain stronger than your desire for answers. If another person eventually chooses honesty, let it come from genuine growth rather than pressure or pursuit. Real love never asks you to abandon yourself while waiting for someone else to find themselves. It invites patience without sacrificing dignity, compassion without losing boundaries, and hope without giving up your own emotional well-being. No matter what another person is struggling to understand, your own healing should always remain the relationship you protect first. The most important thing to remember is this: never mistake another person's emotional struggle for a reflection of your worth. Someone else's inability to communicate, commit, or face their feelings does not determine your value. Their hesitation is their story, not your identity. Their silence is not evidence that you were unimportant. Their inconsistency is not proof that you were impossible to love. One of the hardest lessons in relationships is accepting that deep feelings and emotional maturity are not the same thing. A person can care deeply and still lack the awareness, courage, or stability to build a healthy relationship. They may miss you and still choose distance. They may think about you often and still avoid honest conversations. They may feel genuine affection while remaining trapped inside fears they have never learned to overcome. That realization changes everything. Instead of searching endlessly for explanations, you begin paying attention to patterns. Repeated actions reveal far more than carefully chosen words. Promises can be spoken in a moment, but behavior reflects what someone consistently chooses. Just as important, you begin listening to yourself. Your intuition often notices what your hopeful mind tries to explain away. If every interaction leaves you anxious, uncertain, or emotionally exhausted, that experience deserves your attention. Your peace carries wisdom that wishful thinking sometimes ignores. Carl Jung believed that meaningful encounters transform us. The people who affect us most don't simply become memories. They become part of our inner world. They challenge our beliefs, expose our fears, reveal our strengths, and invite us to grow beyond the versions of ourselves we once believed were permanent. That transformation works both ways. If someone truly shared a meaningful bond with you, it may continue shaping them long after the relationship changes. They may remember the connection differently over time. They may gradually recognize lessons they couldn't see in the moment. Growth often arrives long after the experience that made it necessary. Whether another person eventually understands their emotions is a journey only they can take. No amount of love, patience, or sacrifice on your part can force someone to become emotionally aware before they are ready. Every person has to face their own fears, confront their own patterns, and make the decision to grow. That responsibility belongs to them alone. You cannot carry it for them, and you should never feel guilty for refusing to do so. Your responsibility is much different. It is to stay connected to your own truth instead of getting lost in someone else's confusion. Protect your self-respect, because once you lose that, you begin making decisions from fear instead of confidence. Set healthy boundaries, even when your emotions tempt you to ignore them. Boundaries are not walls that keep love out. They are the foundation that keeps love healthy. They remind you that caring for someone should never require abandoning yourself. Do not put your life on hold, hoping another person will someday become emotionally available. Hope can be beautiful, but when it keeps you trapped in uncertainty, it stops being hope and becomes emotional captivity. Your future should not depend on someone else's willingness to heal. If they choose to grow, let that growth come because they were honest enough to face themselves, not because you spent months or years sacrificing your own peace while waiting. One of the biggest misunderstandings about love is believing that strong emotions are enough to create a lasting relationship. They are not. Intense feelings may bring two people together, but they cannot keep them together by themselves. A healthy relationship is built on honesty, consistency, accountability, trust, and emotional maturity. It requires people who are willing to communicate even when conversations feel uncomfortable. It requires actions that match words. Most importantly, it requires two people who are prepared to show up for each other instead of running whenever vulnerability appears. Sometimes another person's behavior shows that they are still carrying unresolved emotions. Their silence may hide regret. Their distance may reflect fear instead of indifference. Their mixed signals may reveal an internal conflict they have not yet resolved. It is possible that they genuinely care while also feeling overwhelmed by emotions they don't understand. But recognizing that possibility does not mean you should wait indefinitely for them to change. Understanding someone's struggles is not the same as making excuses for behavior that repeatedly hurts you. Compassion allows you to see another person's pain without accepting treatment that damages your own well-being. You can acknowledge that someone is struggling while also deciding that their struggle is no longer your responsibility to carry. Empathy should never require self-abandonment. Loving someone should never mean constantly ignoring your own needs, dismissing your own feelings, or convincing yourself that confusion is the same thing as commitment. Real compassion includes compassion for yourself. Your emotional health deserves the same care and attention that you are willing to offer someone else. Perhaps the greatest lesson is not learning how to decode every silence, every mixed signal, or every emotional withdrawal. The greatest lesson is learning to trust your own clarity. When you stop searching for answers that only another person can provide, something remarkable happens. Your attention shifts inward. Instead of asking, "Will they ever choose me?" you begin asking, "Is this relationship truly giving me the love, respect, and consistency I deserve?" That single shift changes everything, because it places your happiness back into your own hands. The people who truly belong in your life will not be flawless. Everyone has fears, insecurities, and moments of weakness. But emotionally healthy people accept responsibility for those imperfections. They do not use their wounds as permanent excuses. They choose honesty over avoidance. They choose growth instead of repeating the same destructive patterns. They communicate instead of leaving you trapped in endless uncertainty. They understand that love is not only about feeling deeply, it is about acting with integrity. If there is one truth worth remembering, let it be this: pay close attention to what people consistently do, not just what they occasionally say. Words can be spoken in moments of emotion, but repeated behavior reveals someone's level of emotional readiness. Patterns rarely lie. They show you who a person is long before explanations ever will. At the same time, never ignore your own inner peace. If you constantly feel anxious, confused, or emotionally exhausted, those feelings are valuable information. They are not signs that you should try harder. They are invitations to step back and honestly evaluate whether the relationship is helping you grow or keeping you emotionally stuck. The healthiest love is one that allows both people to remain authentic without sacrificing themselves. It is built on mutual respect, emotional safety, trust, and consistent effort. It creates peace instead of constant uncertainty. It encourages healing instead of reopening old wounds. It inspires growth rather than fear. When you truly understand these lessons, silence no longer controls your emotions. Mixed signals no longer keep you awake at night. Unanswered questions no longer determine your self-worth. Instead, you see them for what they are: information about another person's emotional state, not a verdict about your value. And that realization is incredibly freeing. You stop chasing people who cannot meet you where you are. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's readiness to love. You stop waiting for closure that may never come, because you discover that real closure begins within yourself. From that place of clarity, you become stronger, calmer, and more secure. You no longer need someone else's certainty to feel complete, because you have found your own. That is where emotional freedom begins. That is where self-respect becomes stronger than fear. And that is where you finally discover that the greatest relationship you will ever build is the one you have with yourself.